Should be live.
Okay. Hi,
Everybody on the
guys.
stream here?
Yeah. Hello, Internet. We come to you from the present. So today's Glasshouse session, we have a special guest, one of our regulars. Mike is back with us again to, shed some insight that usually is kept to us in the private sessions that none of you are invited to. We also have an absolute buttload of stuff to get through. So let's see, there's been a new research paper that's come out on Chinese cyber stuff. It's got a load of interesting things. We're going to get to that in a bit. There's a proposal to charge Sandworm with cyber war crimes, which is an interesting development. Putin is feeling the pinch from having lost or in the process of losing all of the smart people who do IT, which might mean that he'll be left trying to build his own internet with ransomware crews. That could be amusing. Interesting stuff in South America with Costa Rica declaring state of emergency and El Salvador possibly declaring bankruptcy. Both of those related to cyber via Bitcoin or ransomware, interchangeable, I think. Something we've mentioned a few times is how Musk bringing Starlink into Ukraine means that Starlink is now, like, it's a fair target, it's legitimate, it's part of the war infrastructure that's being used, and Russia's apparently taking notice, so that could be cool. Yeah, other than that, not much is happening. Happy WannaCry Day to everyone, for those who celebrate, of course. And
we need a little statue of Marcus, just a happy WannaCry Day, everybody. Yeah.
Can we commission that as swag? Can we do that as like our first swag item? We get little bobbleheads of Marcus.
Yeah, why not?
There we go. All right. So the next speaker that we have joining us, for whenever it is, they're going to walk away with a Marcus bobblehead.
Is this an addition
to free NordVPN subscription and the Ridge wallet? Today's sponsors.
All right. So what do we start with? You guys want to go war crimes? Because that's like a nice light topic to kind of kick off the day, right?
Yeah, let's ease into it with Russian war crimes.
I mean, so I don't know. I feel like in our internal chat, I know Mike kind of immediately balked at it, and I'm sure that there's very good reasons to do so. I don't know. I thought it was interesting, right? Like, I'm not going to be ultra optimistic about it. I could see how you could add this to the bulk argument about, the abundance of Russian war crimes that you can prosecute. So it's not like we're kind of staking all of our hopes on this, Hail Mary on cyber. But if it were let me put it this way. If they had done nothing other than the cybering, which presumably we're talking about, the power grid. I'm guessing you're not going to prosecute somebody for wiping an org, right?
They wiped the computers used by the air defense systems, which is completely unfair. I mean, those might be legitimate targets, and they might be military, and it might be tactical and all that, and proportional, but I mean, it's also mean.
It is inhumane to lose all your baby pictures if you know.
Right.
No, okay, but presumably they're talking about the power grid thing. If you remove everything else, right? Like if we remove the context of invasion and shooting civilians and bombing schools and hospitals and all the legitimate war crimes, and we just said they're trying to make the case of it being a war crime that somebody shuttered the power grid for however much time, or that they intended to, in this latest iteration, supposedly they were really gonna black out the whole place. Would that rise to the standard?
You can have a crime where you tried to do something and it didn't happen. I mean, yes, there's clearly this conspiracy in that, but
attempted murder, right? There are
that would definitely qualify, right? So The funny quote in the article, if you read the Wired article, is Bobby Chesney, who's now like the dean of the law school, if I understand correctly, who just got promoted in Texas. He says, all you have to do is look at the case as if they planted bombs on the substations involved. I don't think that's true. I'll be honest. I think Mr. Chesney's wrong. I don't think it's that simple. But that's the application of international law that we're looking for here. And whether, I think there's a high bar of proof that this is what they actually intended to do. I think proving intent in cyber is really hard. And proving even attribution is very difficult. So look, are they going to make this work? It's international law. It doesn't matter if they make it work or not. That's the great thing about international law.
That it has no repercussions whatsoever.
That it isn't real.
Right. I mean, while we talk about imaginary law here, now, but okay, let's give
even real law is not real. So like, this is imaginary.
Bobby Chesney like his due, right? So let's why do you feel like there isn't an equivalence between the case Bobby Chesney is the hypothetical that he's putting up and
just two of the things that Dave raised, I wanted to bounce back on and say, like, intent in this case is actually very easy because timing wise and messaging wise, there was some content messaging that went to Ukraine. Essentially, at least with one of the instances, what happened was Ukrainian volunteers cut down power lines that were supplying Crimea, and then Russia retaliated by interfering with electricity to the rest of Ukraine as a tit for tat. So there, in one case,
talking about it. Also, like the cybers are designed in this case to just do that, right? Like we're not talking about one of these ambiguous cases where like there's a couple of different backdoors and maybe the backdoor could have been used in a power station. It's like, no, this is in Destroyer. We're at the point that it speaks the protocol and I'm pretty sure even the instructions that are supposed to be sent to these devices were hard-coded in plain strings within this thing. So like, what the thing is supposed to do. They may not have gotten a chance to set it off, or they did and Microsoft and ESET saved the day, but they did, right? Like, so
yeah, I mean, like the technical side of the attack, because it's like a DDoS that floods like off messages or some shit like that. It's not like, yeah, it's not an ambiguous thing where it could theoretically be used to make power stations blow up, just like other malware can make computers blow up. It's like there's no ambiguity there.
But are they going after Sandworm for Indestroyer, or are they going after them for NotPetya? Because the thing is like NotPetya,
Indestroyer. NotPetya, they're not even touching.
Well, if it's going to be a war crime, it has to be in the context of a war, right? Like,
this is the other thing. That means that the war started in 2015, 14.
Which, I mean, you could argue that it's been a dragging on conflict for the better part of 15 years.
But let's take the ambiguity out of it, right? Like, let's not talk about NotPetya. Let's not talk about whether they were in an official war in 2015 or 16. Let's talk about what's been happening for the past 4 months, and let's talk about Indestroyer, right? Like, we're kind of trying to find solace in the edge cases where we can be like, but like, if you just give them that, right, you are gonna black out the vast swaths of the country at a time of war, affecting primarily civilians. I don't know that, Dave doesn't like the argument that it's equivalent to putting bombs in the substations.
Yeah,
because it's not equivalent. It's a different thing. And I think when law professors screw up, it's because they try to make these equivalences. And that's historically been how the cyber policy space has worked in international
Assume
law.
a hacker of radius R traveling at constant velocity, right?
Uniform size and density. It's really, think about, if you've ever been in a war zone and dealt with war criminals, think about the people who've been convicted of war crimes. They're monsters, right? Think about this intellectual macaroni art is lowering the bar.
Intellectual macaroni art is amazing.
For what war crime?
That's it. We're done. Cancel the call.
All right.
It's just, it's you know, it's law, international relations. It's these people who do a find and replace on whatever the issue is and replace it with cyber or internet, and think that that's going to hold up. It's like it would be helpful to talk to somebody who knows how the internet works. It would be helpful to talk to somebody who knows what war crimes actually look like, right? And you know, there's just a story the other day about, you know, some of the last from the conflict in what used to be Yugoslavia. They're winding up. The old guys or old monsters are dying off, and or they're being released from prison and coming home to a hero's welcome in some cases. Like that, those are war crimes. That's you know, bloody, ugly nightmares.
Look, like exactly. There's mass graves. There's people being deported to Siberia right now. Like there's actual war crimes that are not like there's no ambiguity.
And like I said last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, the things we've done in the name of victory, it's only because of victory that, you know, Hap Arnold or Westmoreland or anybody isn't in the Hague, because, you know, Dresden was not a party, right? Most of the things that we did during war would be considered war crimes, except that we came out on top, right? And our friends. So
it is. I mean, that's the dirty, awful side of war, and we're seeing plenty of it right now. And I'm sure. I mean, if you look at the sort of the disinformation and the plays back and forth, there have been attempts by the Russians to sort of draw similar like equivalences, right? The Ukrainians are doing this, that, and the other, and you're not looking at it that way. There's nothing pretty and simple about war. I do. So I've been trying to kind of give the argument its due, just so we could like not dismiss it out of hand. But like I agree with Mike in the sense that it doesn't feel like an attempt to bring cyber into a war crimes discussion is an attempt to bolster war crimes. It's an attempt to heighten cyber in a sort of like in some like but it's also some half-assed way of saying, is this going to introduce deterrence, right? Like once they know it's a war crime, you know, like
you went there.
No, dude. But that's what's being said in the article, right? Like people will think twice before blacking out, you know, the power grid. Now,
what I'm going to put forward is like, look, could cyber be a war crime? And I think we could construct like a fantasy scenario in which something happens that is war crime like with cyber. This is not it.
PHP is a war crime. As far as if we're going to talk about cyber war crimes, like there are things we can joke about but like.
No, like it would have to be like the orphanage that's running on like the one computer, keeping the guillotine from falling on the puppies, and like someone cybers that.
But that's always the argument with ransomware, right? Like everyone's been trying to have a discussion about what happens when one of these ransomware crews hitting a hospital kills a person. And I think there was already an article about like it's already happened, right? Like
I also want to point out one of the things I find problematic consistently about those types of discussions as well is hospitals are really the ones that should be able to tell this, because if you like follow the guidance that's recommended by SAN, CISA, and the others that think a lot about this, those scenarios should have already been practiced, tested, planned for, and are part of an expected set of activities that will eventually occur. And they should be able to say, like, hey, if a ransomware attack was to hit us, we would have these things happen. And I would like to see more companies actually talk about the results of their cyber Dungeons and Dragons adventures, because those should shed light on these things.
But we're talking about hospitals, right? It's like the Windows XP. We're barely keeping this thing together. 4 dudes in an IT room. Like I met someone from a company. It sounded amazing to me. The other day during Formula One, there was a guy who's telling me that like they have MRI trucks, like they do semis that just drive to a place with an MRI machine inside of it. It's fucking amazing. And like the part of the premise is, well, the hospital's not going to get its shit together in time to fix their MRI machine if like Windows XP just so happened to shit the bed. So like it's easier to park an MRI machine outside than it is for them to get some tech support in time. So like if those are the people we're expecting to have contingency plans and be prepared,
But
like that seems
running tabletop exercises and then, doing full training sessions where they actually take down the grid and see what happens. Maybe they can implement their own chaos monkey so that there's, always something interfering with their processes so that they could learn to be super resilient and, have
the underlying aspect of professionalism, right? When you become a soldier, they teach you about, how to behave. These are the rules. These are the rules of war. This is what a war crime is. This is the things that you should be reporting if they happen, or if you're told to do stuff like that. That doesn't exist unless you literally work for Cyber Command. That doesn't exist, right? The Ukrainian IT army, all the yahoos in the world who are attacking Russian targets, they're amateurs, right? You're going to apply this policy, this law, to people who have not been instructed, not been trained, don't understand the implications of what they're doing. To them, it's just we keyboard fun, and I'm hurting bad guys, and I feel good about myself.
Oh, but
so in terms of literal war crimes, if you're in a militia and you haven't done like proper military training, but you still commit war crimes, that's still war crimes. Like you don't get off just because like I didn't go to the mandatory, Friday morning meeting on that one.
Can you commit a war crime during a special operation though, guys? I don't know.
Wouldn't it be a special operations crime?
It's a special operations, a denazification crime. It's just, sometimes you try to denazify, it doesn't go the way you intended. I think that there's a lot in here. I think, I'm not going to say we don't have the relevant expertise because I don't think that's the right issue at hand. I don't think it's the legal bar that's the problem. I think it's trying to.
I'm going to push back. I'm going to say that in this thing, it's the legal bar that is the problem. The legal people are making this shit up. Like, it's not a.
Well, I'll tell you this, man. If the legal people told me that they could clear that case, that they could win it, then we would have a different conversation. I think the argument here and the macaroni art discussion, which I think was really on point, is you are somehow lowering the value of the prosecution, the whole idea of a war crime, by turning it into like bleep bloop keyboard, like you were going to do something bad. And on that front, since we're talking about, how bullshit the application of law, especially international law, but law in general to these things is, like, why haven't we prosecuted ransomware operators who have inadvertently caused deaths because they were, fucking with a hospital? Because it's happened already. There's already articles about it. It's already been discussed, right? Like, we're not looking to prosecute those people for, involuntary manslaughter. Or maybe we are. But like maybe we should start in baby steps before we start trying to do a full-on cyber war crime.
Yeah, like war crime stuff. I don't know. I think JAGs kind of hit it on the head with it devalues what an actual war crime is. I mean, part of it is
Mike did.
Oh yeah, Mike. Please, man, speak up. Say something funny, like after Dave's macaroni art comment,
Stop giving all the credit away. This is how we end up with misattributed quotes on the Twitters where I'm like, yes, hilarious. Not me, though. It was Pablo. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I think we're going to burn out on the cyber war crimes thing just because we don't have any legal people that we can, we don't have a foil. We don't have someone who's actually strongly advocating for it. So there's going to be a lot of us on the same side, which, usually a panel goes really well when everyone's like, look, I want to agree with JAGs and also add something else.
Well, let me give you another angle on this. When it comes to international law and how proxy conflicts work, does Costa Rica have a case against Russia with regards to the latest mega thing that happened there? And I also think that people are not talking about this Costa Rica thing enough. Like at the point where a country is declaring a state of emergency because a ransomware crew is taking them on, and that ransomware crew is an avowed proxy for Russia.
I also, there's
is happening.
There's one little point I wanted to make because I was going to transition to this a second ago, but it is funny with Russia having this big special operation to denazify, yet Danger 1488 from Conti is still rolling around where they've got clear overt Nazi things in their name. So yeah, with Nazi Conti on this, like it is unbelievable the way that they've pushed this further now. Like hitting the full country level as overtly and blatantly taunting they are about it. Like
Nazi Conti is the way we should refer to them from now on. Look, I don't mean to be that guy because I have been in several of these discussions already, but like part of this is it's Costa Rica. Like if it wasn't Costa Rica,
would like if Conti tried to do this to the U.S., they could, right?
No. I mean, forget the U.S., right? It's too big. It's the idea of development, but like yeah, right. Like Finland is down because of Conti. Now let's talk. And honestly, I mean that has greater value now because you're saying, well, the whole context of NATO, whatever. That's not my point. My point is like I wonder if it's the same as the hospitals where you're like, well, but they're indefensible because their IT infrastructure is shit. Like, is there like a
larger IT department than Costa Rica? Like they almost definitely have more budget allocated.
I'm saying that the part of the reason we're not having the discussion on the right terms is that we think less of Costa Rica on a technical level. So if we could pretend that this is a very technically capable nation, like I don't know, some Western European country that doesn't share a border with Russia and white, then, you know, let's say this happened to Spain, right? Like, let's say that Spain was just completely screwed over a mass ransomware infection. And it is Conti, it is this sort of proxy, sort of self-avowed proxy of the Russian government.
You know what, we could even make it interesting. Let's say instead of the entire country, just like whatever their national health service is. Like
I mean, they hit the UK's National Health Service years ago. And the thing is right, what bothers me so much about at least the ransom message that they posted to their data leak site is like they, in one hand saying like, this is not political, but fuck Biden, and like kind of being like, this is only like a beginning or like a test to like, it's like you guys are trying to operate on the world stage and you're definitely half saying you're not political while at the other side, yeah.
It's inevitably political.
Had direct, like FSB was giving them orders, right? Like
just some light coordination, a little like nudging. And I mean, this happened with Game Over Seuss as well. It's just we don't care about that anymore. Now we care about ransomware. I guess the question here is, like, I think Dave put this topic in the sheet. Like, what do you expect to be our response? Like, what should be our response? Because right now it's just underwhelm. But what did you know, what should be our response to this? Because all we're saying is, look at how bad the ransomware problem is. And every day we're like, look at how bad the ransomware problem is. And then we find some greater case where you go, oh my God, how bad is this ransomware problem? So like before it was critical infrastructure 3 months ago, like oil pipelines, hospitals, whatever.
We start taking out continents, right? Like, right. First it was infrastructure. Now it's countries. Next up, it's going to be like federations and unions. And after that, it's going to be continents.
Conti takes over the moon. Yes.
I think it's interesting they're still doing ransomware and have not moved over to just state action, right? Like, is that, I mean, that's definitely something you could have predicted. You could be saying, all right, well, this is the talent Russia has. Why are they not all currently busy?
Well, so that's I think an important thing to differentiate, because I think the reason that they have not gone to the full, we are a state actor doing state things, is that they are fundamentally supported by this ecosystem of affiliates, financial mules, and things like that. And there's all these different subcomponents. And if you were to go hard into the like, we are a national capability, that changes that dynamic, because there are still a lot of them that are just in it to make money. They don't give a shit about the politics. and it's a
like
gig
all of
economy.
them are in it to make money. Like
Yes,
the
they're all in
politics
it.
is, yeah,
Yeah.
and like basically, if there was an alignment between politics and making money, then you would see that happening. But you wouldn't see it the other way around. Like if you wouldn't see like here's a purely political thing that they're doing pro bono. Like
Well, Russia does still have money, right? And they also have a significant amount of, shall we call it, law enforcement style soft power that they can use to incentivize teams to do things on their behalf. So what I'm trying to say is like, is there an argument that cyber is not important enough for the Russian government to fully leverage the capabilities they probably have at arm's reach?
But they don't think about them though. Like they like Russian cyber capabilities are the GRU, the FSB, and the SVR with whatever contractors they get from the private sector. Like Putin, whenever he says stuff about like, I'm going to take down the internet, you can't stop me, he's not thinking I'm going to unleash ransomware. He's like, I'm going to fucking call up the GRU and tell them like, go nuts. Like
right now, like we're kind of, let's not oversimplify Russia either, right? It's not like the only thing they're doing is Ukraine, and it's not like every Conti action is a Russian government action. We've had this conversation in previous sessions about how the ransomware operators can become a very vital part of a post-sanctions, can barely bake bread Russia. And I don't think that that's a matter of money or financial motivation on their part at that point. At that point, they're the ones sitting on all the money, and it's really the motivator is don't throw us in prison, bro. Which has always been kind of the case, but now they take a much more central role, right? Like somebody said before this Bitcoin dip, they had something like $2 billion in their wallets. I think what's that these days? $250,000. I don't know. Like, volatility in the Bitcoin space is harsh, but I can see how they can become a more central part of the Russian tactics and actions, but I don't think they are now. And I think we'd be foolish to equate everything that Conti is doing. As Silas said, they're a bunch of affiliates. You've got a couple of dumbasses. Like there's all kinds of even between them, they're like, why the fuck did you do that? Like it's not a perfectly coordinated group.
Right. And I just one other thing on that is that the like basically that $2 billion, like that's a lot for a cybercrime environment, whatever. But in terms of like national budgets, like even Russia's national budget, right? Like it's not nothing, but it's not even a 1% of their their annual spend.
Right,
so like I mean it's good, it will be useful, but it's not like, so for example, like with North Korea, like I don't think that their annual budget is so big that ransomware is an insignificant part of it.
But Grub, they're not. North Korea isn't using ransomware to get people food. North Korea is using ransomware to finance operations or trips for Dennis Rodman or whatever the fuck it is that Kim Jong-un likes these days. And I think that's kind of a crucial point, right? Because I had this argument in some legal forum or whatever that I accidentally stumbled into. And the discussion was, well, the country is not going to fund itself with that. It's like, yeah, they don't give a shit about the country. We're talking about, even at the worst parts of the Soviet Union, the KGB was still 200,000 people strong and functioning hard in other nations in whatever way they could finance that, even if people were starving to death. And so we're not talking about again, this is why I want to place a really big space between ransomware operators and cartels being an arm of the Russian government and it not being an official part of the government, right? Like there is no part of that is going to go into making Russia or the Russian government function. It is going to go into allowing all kinds of bullshit to be financed, to oh, how wonderful to be able to move $200,000 to a group station, to a cell stationed in South America to do X, Y, and Z. And that's the kind of thing that $2 billion goes a very long way for in this sort of like black budget kind of situation.
Right. But so that just to go back to international relations for a second, one of the major values that ransomware brings is all of the money that's given to FSB for protection. So Putin needs to have the FSB supporting him. That's part of how he stays in power, is that the FSB is not turned against him. He needs to bribe them to a degree to make sure that they stay on side, right? So he could either do it with his money by giving them, salaries and bonuses and all this other stuff, or he could provide a route for them to get that money elsewhere. So he's allowing and encouraging the corruption, which is allowing someone else's money to buy the loyalty of the FSB to support Putin.
I mean, I don't know, man. Did you see that Soldatov? Did you see the Soldatov article where like the FSB has totally fallen out of favor and now it's all the GRU, and like there's all these people like dancing on the corpses of the FSB as if like that's the end for them. First of all, Soldatov, I love the books. I like the occasionally accurate contributions, but he's very much not like a soothsayer for Russian intelligence or the government, right? Like there's a lot of ways that shit goes wrong, and you could talk about it as being speculation. You could talk about whatever you want, but like, I don't know that we should interpret very public tea leaves at a very large distance in a Western audience as authoritative of anything happening between the intelligence services right now. And I bring that up not specifically for this group, but because there's analysts out there and people out there who seem to be fascinated by, was this the fifth department of whatever? And you're like, slow down, back up. Like, yes, maybe certain groups have been selected for some of these things. In other cases, I think we're not quite clear on what groups are involved. Like part of the whole Russian invasion of Ukraine on the cyber front has been trying to categorize a bunch of different groups. And it turns out that a whole bunch of them are sandwormy. But that doesn't mean all of them are, first of all. Second, it doesn't mean that they're all groups we've known before. Third, there's a shit ton more activity that we just haven't seen, period. Fourth, I don't know how you go and draw the lines from that shit to this was the SVR, this was the FSB, and this was the GRU, and it's all perfectly cut. That is not what that organizational structure looks like. This isn't happening out of Maryland, where everybody has the right contractor and nobody steps on anyone's dicks. Like, that's not how Russia works. And like, I'm baffled by how much we're taking this kind of bullshit to heart when it comes to articles like sorry, like I feel like this kind of came at you, Grug, but it's more the frustration.
No, I was going to say, like, are you saying that part of the problem is some sort of we're looking in the mirror, or what I might call mirror imaging, hypothetically? Like, I don't know if is that a thing? Anyway, like, but no, I completely agree with you. So I think some of the stuff we can tell, like GRU is involved in a lot of the stuff in Ukraine because it's military operations doing military cyber by the military cyber people. Like, that's what you would expect. It would be very, very weird if it wasn't, because you'd be seriously wondering how they manage that coordination. It wouldn't make sense. But, you're absolutely right that you can't look at anything that isn't super clear cut. Like, I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that the, attacks against the ADS, the air defense systems, was done in coordination and direction by military intelligence because they needed to do that for military reasons. And if they had tried to coordinate that with FSB saying, okay, we're going to go live on Saturday. No, wait, hang on, we've changed it. It would not work, and it would not be possible. But yes, you're absolutely right. Like, with all the stuff going on. And the other thing to remember, of course, is that now that there's a war on, there's a lot of countries that were not interested in Ukraine previously, but now they are, for figuring out what's happening with cyber, figuring out what this means for them.
Is this your segue to the Chinese paper?
It is now.
Well, good, because let's talk about it, man.
You
Yeah,
fucked
all
up
right,
his,
let's go to that.
you fucked up his totally not
Oh.
sharp segue into this other.
I was on a
it's,
roll.
it's better as a segue.
I mean, Dave, I want you to kick this off. Like, I love this paper, like, and it is absolutely fascinating, but I feel like you've got the better knowledge of it.
All right, so here's some things that I learned while I was reading through this paper.
Wait, you got to fill it in for those of us that have
Oh,
not
my
read the
bad.
fucking
For
paper.
those of you who are not in the
Oh.
document, for example, be in the open document, people. So Margin Research yesterday released like a Chinese survey of the overall offensive cyber landscape. And I don't believe that they claimed it was a comprehensive survey. So I know that there's some critiques that it's not like every Chinese person that's ever worked in cyber, right? It's not that. It's not meant to be that. It's meant to be like a sampling. But there's some things that I learned, and you can go click on it. We'll even paste. You know what? Did
I
someone
posted it
paste
in the Twitch chat.
Fair enough. All right, so here's some things that I learned, right? Like Knownsec is 1,800 people. How does that compare to? I'm just going to put a company out in the area like SentinelOne. How many people is SentinelOne? I don't know. Are they 1,800?
I think you picked the one company I can't answer that.
I
for,
know.
right?
How big is McAfee, for example?
Well, based on what Google says, SentinelOne is 970 people, which
That's
I'm
not accurate, but yes, okay.
But let's just say it's on the ballpark of size, right? Like
McAfee's,
of a major company.
McAfee's reportedly 7K or 69.
7,000 people, 1,600 people. So it's not as big as McAfee, but still, like pretty big, right?
I'd like to say it's
big.
more efficient, but yeah, go on.
Agreed.
Sure. I mean, I number sizes and everything, right? Like that's the thing. But like, I don't know what all these people work on, but like they have a bunch of offices. They're big.
So the thing is, I was going to say immunity might be a better thing to compare it to than McAfee. Like a lot of these.
Yeah, let's do that. How big is immunity?
Right? Like 40 people, right? So like, what percentage of immunities are
they? Focus on what they're developing and doing. I think they're more immunities. Like they're not building an AV system necessarily. They're more
correct.
Building a really
okay, wait. We're getting away from the point.
Like the point is scale is there, right? That's a point, right? And learning about the scale is important. It's something that is not readily in people's heads. The second thing I learned was looking up the startup model, looking at VC, looking at funding. That's super important for like all the cyber policy analysis, all this stuff. Like I think looking at the money is important. Like where's it coming from? Because people who fund you often have not like, I'm not going to say strings attached, but they have goals with their funding, right? You have environmental funds, you have national security funds, you have, I want to make a bunch of money on tobacco funds, whatever it is. So I think that's important. And then if you look at the names of the companies that are like funding these companies, it's not the Raytheons of China that are funding these companies. It's the Googles of China that are funding these companies. So that's something that I think is a cultural difference or a community difference. And it's very, in my mind, it was very interesting. So I recommend everyone read the paper and learn all these amazing things for themselves.
Question for you. Does Raytheon fund startups in the US?
I mean, it's almost like they do. Yeah, they probably, I don't know if they do or don't, but they definitely buy them, right? So they're definitely invested in them.
Yeah, because I mean, like we've done like the Tianfu Cup, and we've looked at before we've talked about how like China just dominated pwn to own, and again, that like part of it was that they just had a depth to their bench that no one else could bring to the table, right? Like they're saying like, you know, all right, we're going to put 30 people for like this one contest where everyone else is bringing 2. And
well, what you hear from the American teams, what Americans in general, is that, oh, our people are busy doing real things, right? So that's what you hear. You're like, oh, there's not, you know, we're not competing as much in the CTF scene or whatever, like because, or the Pontoon scene, because we're busy doing stuff. The people who have these skills are doing stuff. And I would say like, that looks pretty weak when you look at the difference in the two environments, right? When you actually look at the scale, when you actually get the data and look at it, it looks like a weak argument. I'm not saying it is a weak argument. I'm saying, if you look at the data, and that's what we should be doing in cyber policy, look at actual data, amazing. It's an amazing idea. And what you also have
Fuck
is like, I
off.
think you have like this balkanization of analysis in the States where like, you know, like every analysis team has their own sort of culture and style and data and clusters and everything else. And I don't necessarily, and so they're probably looking at this and they're like, oh my gosh, it's not that big, it's not that good. But I'm like, a lot of the stuff that doesn't happen in public is not useful for cyber policy, right? Like you can have all the amazing reporting on all the amazing teams you have in private in TLP Red, but until it's so kind of in public, it's tough to move the engines of policy. So, and we've seen this happen in the past, obviously. I think the other thing I think was happening was the vulnerability equities process was a pretty obvious example of that like what's in public mattered, what was in private didn't.
Well, spoiler alert, tune in next week when we have Katie Mazuris with us and we can properly discuss these things.
Sure.
So that being a pin on your vulnerability equities process discussion. So I haven't read the paper. I have not read the paper yet. I have had other things to.
I have strong opinions, is what
I
you're
have
going to
strong.
say.
No, I have no strong opinions. Actually, when I'm trying to kind of get some takeaways from you, Dave, in the sense of you're learning things. They seem to be you seem to be learning things in contrast to where we are, and sort of U.S. centric. What exactly are you learning from there? That because I feel like I'm trying to get some salient points from you in the sense that I barely understand the vuln side and the investment side in the US when it comes to those things, which you're very much an expert on. I am even less aware of how, like, what assumptions are in there that are even different from China. So like I'm trying to kind of bring that out of you a little bit for the sake of those of us that have no fucking clue.
Well, hold on. So let me try and bridge this a little bit, because I've spent a lot of time like kind of looking at some of these pieces as well over the past like year or so. So one of the kind of like historic things that we know is that like years ago, a lot of the Chinese actors forked off and were like, we're going to create our own tools, we're going to build out our own culture. And especially to some of the work that Dave has done looking at other distinct like regional hacker scenes as well with this, it's been really interesting to watch how the tradecraft and the way that China, I don't want to call it like, because a lot of it's just they're disorganized like skid hackers. But one of the things that I've noticed is that like it's influenced their tooling in the way that they go about designing some of the things. So specifically, one of the kind of things that I was looking for a while back was, if I wanted to say, find out what all the hosts that are online for like North Korea, like that kind of like target management centric approach is very present in a lot of the tooling that they're using, but it's not something that's present in ours. Additionally, because of being behind the Great Firewall, they have a lot of tools that are dedicated towards proxy chaining. And if you look at things like it's like X-rays and some of those things, like they're brilliant and they're fascinating, but they're things that we don't put a lot of emphasis on in sort of the like American tooling side. And if you look at somewhere like in contrast, like Iran, who still follows very much the US scene, and like they have their own scene that's been dedicated and broken off, but they still have a lot of like tooling dependency on the US. So they still focus heavily on Cobalt Strike. They still focus a lot on Metasploit. But that shapes their ecosystem entirely as well. So there's really interesting things that sort of the middle ground between the like high academic side of looking at the like, what does this mean in terms of the companies? And then there's the middle ground of like where.
So yeah. So I just that sparked a thought for me with the I wonder how much of tooling and things like that is driven by what is socially rewarded within the communities, right? So in the US, for a while, there was a big investment on like Metasploit, Canvas. There was a lot of interest in Core SCI, doing those sort of big tools that brought in everything and like gave you like a sort of like one-stop shop. That was the thing, and that was where everyone was getting their like social credits from. Like you're doing that, you're contributing to that. That was big, and then sort of those are now established, and it's moved on. There's like for a while, big stuff on ransomware. Big stuff on reverse engineering, like Binja and all that stuff. and those are still popular. Now, I'm wondering, for example, in China, what do they reward? So within the hacker community, they might reward exploits. So if you're big on doing a lot of exploits and sharing exploit techniques and things like that, they might not be so interested in other types of tooling because that's not going to get them the same recognition that it would if they were, building, I don't know, like the new ROP chain automatic, whatever creation tool.
Well, that's an
Similarly,
interesting question, Grug. Like, just to kind of to bolster your point, there's some very different sharing culture in China when it comes to, and I'm learning this like in bits and fragments, but like even when it comes to source code for a lot of things, the notion of like originality and closed source development isn't necessarily something that gets, I'm not going to say that it doesn't get rewarded. I just don't think that it's quite so strictly adhered to. If anything, it's totally different. And something that I learned the hard way was like Silas and I went back to look at X4L, at some point, and now I see like Symantec did Daxam, this like newer version. But what was interesting is when X4L was a rootkit, it was found in some aerospace companies years back by Microsoft, and people looked into it at the time. It was super interesting, and no one could tell who was behind it. When we went to look back at it, what was interesting was there were a bunch more rootkits, it turns out, that people hadn't found. But more importantly, there was like a well-known Chinese forum where the source code for these things was being shared back and forth. And like people weren't able to identify that when X4L first happened. You're like, oh my God, APT attack. And I still think, oh my God, APT attack. But like, oh my God, APT attack. And the source code has a support email address in like this forum. And there's all these Chinese people just being like, oh yeah, here's another bit. And like, let's fix it this way. And you're like, totally different fucking culture, right? Very different approach.
All right. So all right, here's another issue.
APT thing, that is a that's a very interesting APT model where it is like open source support for APT capabilities. Sorry, Dave.
No, you're totally right. Like things are not always going to progress the way we think they are is an important point. I think there's a bunch of things in this stuff, right? So one, understanding the offensive supply chain and how countries protect and nurture it is important, right? Like if you want your country to be strong at cyber, you have to protect and nurture your offensive supply chain. There's no other way. You can't just assume that your general purpose giant contractors are going to do it for you, right? Like that's just a natural way of life. The other big thing here is that we are very focused as a country on using like export control and other mechanisms to try to tamp down on corporate sort of versions of capability distribution. But at some point, there's actually a lot more capability distribution that happens between our adversaries that is not like a sold tool, that is in fact trained and just technology sharing between two groups that like each other, right? Like you'll see Iranians and the Chinese cooperating deeply on technical offensive measures. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss really important stuff, which means your forecasting is bad, right? So these are all, it should be all part of your practice of how do I learn about this space and then make forecasts and test my, hypotheses. All that stuff should be professionalized. And it's not, it's fun.
Intelligence analysis.
That's the thing I've heard of. I think, all right, so let me just say like,
shocker.
I have learned so much from this group of people and also from people who are not on here, like when trying to figure out how this is done, because I'm sort of a newbie in a lot of this. And one thing I've learned that is just really key, especially from JD work, is like your brain is the enemy, right? Like so much of your assumptions are the enemy. It's the same thing when you're like reviewing source code for vulnerabilities. Is like a lot of the stuff that you have to throw out. You have to be sort of apolitical. You have to be balanced on the things to make good predictions. And what you see is people making bad predictions because they can't do that because they don't understand their brain is the enemy.
Every problem is a zero-based exercise. You go in and that's why I get super irritated at people who IOC herders who try to do work above their level of qualification. And that's not a personal attack. It's like you have to be trained. And not everybody can log years in the military or an intelligence agency, but there are books where they teach you how to do this stuff, right? You have to follow the methodology, and you follow where the data takes you. And everybody goes into these problems thinking, oh, well, I've been working this for 20 years. I have a pretty good idea of where this is going to go.
But that's the problem.
Yeah,
that actually screws you.
You have to approach everything from the get-go, zero base from the get-go, because as you said, that's how you get the much more accurate answers and or forecasts. Because otherwise, you're four people. No offense to anybody here, but that's how you get to be four people on a panel, all patting each other on the back about how right you were.
We're five, so you must mean someone else, obviously.
I think that part of that, I mean, that's a huge point, right? The training, we are an industry on all sides, offensive, defensive, of mostly self-trained people. There isn't like a rigorous curriculum unless you went to RPI and you get to be one of those geniuses. Sorry, Silas.
No, but you're right. I mean, RPI.
But even there, I don't know that you have an intelligence analysis component to it. I think if we're going to kind of move further than that, part of the issue is the incentive structure. Because at the end of the day, if we were all a bunch of intellectually dishonest, very biased analysts, and we were in a structure that did not reward bad analysis, I think that house of cards eventually caves in on you. No offense to security scorecard, but like we are in a place where that isn't necessarily the case, right? Like there's a couple of different ways. There's the public side of it, not necessarily disincentivizing bad analysis, but then there's also like everybody gets to sell their reports in private. We're never going to sit down and have a postmortem where we go, holy shit, were you guys wrong about that? And it furthers that, right? It continues to incentivize that.
Like there's also not someone doing that. Like there's not a forum where someone is going, I have collected all of the reporting from 2017 from all of the actors and put it together, and then looked at what we know now and said, all right, these guys just consistently got it wrong over and over again, whereas these guys were on the money. And so, whatever the methodology that they were using then, clearly it's better. But like there's
Dave with Kaspersky.
Hey, Kaspersky's in the document today.
But not for a good thing.
Yeah, why are they not in the document?
You put them in the document every time, but it's never look at how good their analysis is.
It's true.
So here's one of the things is like in Canada, the intelligence community wanted to find out like what are the things that make good analysis? Like, can you predict who's going to be good at doing analysis and who won't? And they did this very, very long running study and all this shit. And what they came out with was the only predictor of quality and accuracy was time on desk. So if someone had done 20 years on the China desk, they were good at doing China stuff, better than someone who'd only done 2 years on China desk. But what was really interesting was that didn't transfer. So if you did 10 years on China desk and you're at like the 10-year level, and you got moved to say like Russia desk, you wouldn't drop down to 0, but you would not be at 10, right? Like all of the things that you learned didn't transfer over because they were very, very specific to the domain that you were looking at. So that's, to a degree, that's part of the reason that the methodologies exist, is to make sure that like, we can at least correct for people who don't have the right experience and are trying to bring it over from somewhere else. They at least document.
You can't bring up methodology or training or any or professionalization in this stuff without being called a gatekeeper or
absolutely. If you're
all these sorts of things. Like
I don't think that's the issue.
I mean, I don't care where you come from but I care that you're doing bad work. I want to bring you up, level up your
psychology of intelligence analysis, tradecraft. All of these books are free. You can read them. It doesn't cost money.
Yeah, and there's organizations that have structures. They'll certify you. They'll say that not certified. That's a bad way to put it, but you follow this approach. This is a sort of industry standard sort of way of doing things, as opposed to this haphazard where people making stuff up as they go along. And it's not. I mean, I applaud the ingenuity, but at some point, this has to stop being a popularity contest and IOC herding. The value of that sort of thing, it stops at a certain level, and at some point people have to. So, and there could be. I'm willing to accept that there is probably a demand issue, right? Maybe there's people who don't realize it's like, oh, I'm getting all this tactical level intelligence stuff, and I can deal with the things that are in front of me. But at some point, don't people want to know what's coming around? Going to happen tomorrow? Don't you want to know what's coming around the corner, or have some reasonable idea what's going around the corner? And that the number of people who are doing that, this doesn't seem to.
There's an issue there, Mike, where like I agree with 100% of what you're saying from an intelligence analyst perspective, and sort of the disappointment that comes with having any experience in intelligence analysis and then dealing with the CTI industry in general. But then the question becomes, who are we talking about reports being for, and what kind of reporting are we talking about? Because there's a split in the industry right now, for the most part, between shops that have a deep technical bench and know what the fuck they're talking about on the technical side, and sometimes they happen to have good intelligence analysts who can cobble that together with, you know, some larger analysis about, you know, international relations, organizations, and what's going on. Then you have a bunch of shops that have no technical analysis bench whatsoever, and all they do all day is put out bullshit like, how is the Chinese like new whatever Belt and Road Initiative is going to affect the cybers in you, and like 5G in you, and like it becomes a matter of like, these are the shops that are selling analyst hours, for example, and you like pay them for 20 analyst hours a quarter. You didn't use 5 of them, so like by the end of the quarter you're like, 5G, tell me about 5G. I don't know, like what's going to happen. Like, we're just trying to not lose money. And it's just sort of like self-reinforcing speculation and speculative level analysis that ends up getting published, ends up getting pushed, ends up getting discussed, and ends up making people very proud of what they're putting up. But it's very complicated to take pure intel analysis rudiments and practice and talk about it in cyber in the same way that I would expect intelligence analysis about nuclear proliferation to need to have a little more respect for the realities of the technical side and physics side of nuclear physics, right?
I really want to disagree with you on this though, but I also know that we have like 2 minutes left. But the thing is like,
that's why I took this time.
I know, and the thing is,
okay,
like,
so Silas, I hate to cut you off.
Oh no, I'm going to keep going here.
So this is the thing.
He controls the stream.
with Belt and Road stuff, like there is good stuff, at least in those areas. Like the 5G definitely is a little further, but Belt and Road stuff, like there is a track record of companies in those sectors being targeted, and it is useful. I would argue though that there are many customers that cannot process that to the degree they need. Mm-hmm. And the thing is like, if you're a CISO, that's a good report to read, because you'll know, like, it'll help you prioritize and set some expectations that, okay, I know that my company develops something that is now going to be part of China's like 5-year plan going forward. Like, I need to make sure that there's some degree of coverage of that. And like, there's minor ways you can sway it. Also though, like that's not reporting that's beneficial to everyone. And I want to give MITRE credit on this, because it is perhaps some of the best application of intelligence that I've ever seen, which is they put out a paper about a year ago talking about how they could predict attacks from like predict phishing campaigns of DPRK actors down to like a 1 to 2 day window. It's fucking amazing research.
Is MITRE, you said?
Yep, MITRE, I believe. I'll try and find the paper. It's amazing, but it's because they look at those types of reporting, they use those as like guiding influences, and then map it down as well to their own org. And it's definitely the sort of like know thyself, know thy enemy, like outward view of it. And it's really good stuff. And I think is the edge case though for, yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna have to stop, but there's so much to do on. Okay, so before we go, I want to send a fuck you to, let's call him Ags J. No, look, I think we could do a huge thing on intelligence analysis. It's a massive field. There's a lot to be said about like a broader reporting of like China's going to be interested in these fields, and also the reporting on like, here's things we found, here's what it tells us about how their tooling development is going, and also, you know, like, here are things that are like big trends in the country and where we predict, you know, those trends going in terms of tooling, et cetera, et cetera. All of which we're going to do at another time, because I need to tell you that next week, Katie Emo is going to be here, and we're going to be talking about whatever the hell she wants to talk about, actually, because that's basically how we roll. And so, you know, absolutely tune in next week on not the 13th, whatever 13 plus 7 is.
20?
Don't try to do math.
Nerd over here.
Next Friday, at this time on this channel.
Friday.
Friday.
At the Glasshouse Center.
And don't forget to get Marcus Hutchins a drink at some point, troll him a little bit, thank him for being the patron saint of WannaCry's on this 5th anniversary. Also, feel free to throw some tomatoes at your local FBI office, because why not? Yeah.
We just very briefly, we do not support or condone or encourage you to do anything illegal.
I don't know about encourage. Encourage, we might. We don't.
We encourage you not to get caught.
Yes.
That's, you know, don't ruin your life.
Yes.
And again, if you know of, we're obviously beefing up our guest speakers and guest attendees, but if you want to be on the show, or you know someone who wants to be on the show, let us know.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, guys. Thanks everybody for showing up.
Smash that like and subscribe.
Yeah, big shout out to Kim Zetter for providing the sponsorship funds to create the logo that you've all seen, along with the you know, we've got a new office now, and
Turns running the stream.
Yep. And yeah, like if you actually do want to like give us money so that we can start throwing money at Fiverr and looking like ever so slightly more professional, talk to us. But mostly talk to us about people that you want to see talking to us. That was smooth as fuck. All right.
So smooth.
Right.
Thanks, Mike, for showing up. Let's get Mike in here more often as well. Yeah, everybody, go away. Go do some real work.
Thanks for coming.
See you guys.
Bye.